invite Rajoshi Ghosh. She's the co-founder and COO of Hasura. And we've been talking, about data and data scientists and citizen data scientists. And Rajoshi, welcome Rajoshi, is going to bring an interesting perspective. So Rajoshi, first tell us about Hasura, right? What do you do? What does Hasura do? And then we'll get into a little bit of the follow-up on the conversation we've been having over the last hour.
Absolutely, Narendra. Thank you for having me. So Hasura is actually an open source company, open source product. And, it's about 3 years old as a company and, product. And what Hasura does is Hasura solves the data access problem. So what that means is today when you need to build any kind of applications, web, mobile applications, online applications, you need a big part of that is basically access to your data. And with the kind of applications that are being built today, your data could be anywhere. You have your primary data sources, which are typically the databases and different kinds of databases, and that whole industry is evolving. But you also have, with the evolution of services in the SaaS economy, you also have portions of your data in, say, Stripe or Salesforce, so, like maybe Kissflow, right? Like somewhere else. So basically, your data is in a different place. And when you're building applications, you need to have access to this data in a way, in a secure manner, in a performant manner. And like that's that bottleneck over there, that access to data, where you're kind of building these APIs to access the data. So that's the portion that Hasura kind of automates. And Hasura gives you instant APIs on your data. And the API that Hasura gives you is a GraphQL API, which is, a specification of an API that developers typically love using because of the rich, ecosystem around it. There's lots of stuff about GraphQL and why developers are sort of tending towards GraphQL as an API format. So we give you GraphQL APIs out of the box, but essentially that data access portion is what Hasura is automating. So so this is something, it's an open source product. Like I mentioned, we've been around as a product for about 2.5, 3 years, and now we've just I think as of this week or end of last week, we just crossed 100 million downloads of Hasura. And, we've been we're being used by...
Wait, sorry, stop press. 100 million downloads?
Yes, 100 million downloads.
I did not know that. 100 million downloads. Guys in the audience, if you haven't heard about Hasura, clearly 100 million other people have figured it out, right? So, or at least 100 million downloads have, so somebody else is taking advantage of the opportunity. You have to tell us more about this. What are people doing with it?
So I think we've seen people use Hasura in all kinds of industries and all kinds of use cases, in side projects to mission critical applications to digital transformation initiatives where it's a tier 1 application. So we've got your coffee shop developer to your Fortune 500 company architects kind of using Hasura. So Hasura we've not really spoken about it as a low code product, but in a sense it is like a low code product, but we only focus on that data access portion. And the whole philosophy around it is that as a developer or as a business, you want to focus your time and energy on the portion of the business that's closest to your customer, right? And as much of the other stuff that we can automate away or make a commodity, that that's kind of the focus, and that's sort of like the movement, right? That is the whole low code movement in a sense. So so kind of like we've seen so Hasura, the GraphQL APIs are real-time API. So we're also giving you real-time API. So in fact, like similar to Zadle, in fact, we run our conferences on a platform called Conf. That's built on there's actually because there's an explosion of event kind of platforms coming up. So there's event platforms where there's the real-time chat aspect and whatnot, those kinds of things. And like I said, mission critical applications. I think United Health Group is sort of going through a whole digital transformation process, and they've been able to build applications which would take 1-2 years and under a month to a few weeks. And again, that's accelerated their digital transformation journey. So all kinds. We've got like one of the largest self-driving car companies that, the one that you think of, which I will not name, but probably the one that you think of, and the space company. Might be a similarity, but yeah, people are using this kind of like in lots of. It could be a side application, it could be the core application, but the use cases are plenty, and that data access, because the data access portion is kind of the bottleneck. So whatever you need that data for for the application that you're kind of building. So
Wow,
that's
so
what
you're making healthcare better, you're helping cars drive faster, you're helping make my coffee better. No, I'm just kidding. Um, More on those lines, how do um, how do people engage? Is this something which is mostly people within the enterprises? Are you primarily helping get access to structured data, or are you also helping get access to unstructured streaming data? Social is a mess, right, in terms of
right.
data sources. I'm going to throw in a bunch of questions. Are you also helping get access to streaming data versus static? um, help
Yeah.
help us help folks in the audience so that they'll be able to place themselves as to where would they want to take opportunity of Hasura's capabilities.
Absolutely. So we started off as a product giving you APIs on a Postgres database. So that was the first database, and so you have Hasura, you download Hasura. Today we have a cloud offering as well, but you pointed to your Postgres database, your existing database. So you have
Mhm.
your existing data, and Hasura sort of reads that, and you're able you get access to that data. You can add a layer of authorization, and you're able to access your data in your Postgres database as a GraphQL API with all of the levels of authorization added in a way that you can securely access that for your online applications. So that's kind of the primary database that we started off with supporting. Today we are we're in the early stages of adding support for MySQL and SQL Server databases, and sort of like as we go on, we will start adding different kinds of databases. So we will move towards more unstructured data, document data stores, and whatnot as we go forward. But today, it's Postgres, SQL Server, and MySQL, and I think we will be also adding support for BigQuery. So that's the database side of things, and then you kind of you can, if you already have a GraphQL API, like if you have a service that already speaks GraphQL, then you can kind of bring that in, and then you're able to kind of join, like how you join data between like tables in a database. You can also
Mhm.
start joining data between like your database and your other services. So
Mhm.
say you have your payment information in Stripe, and your user information is in your database. You're able to you know fetch that data from your database and Stripe in sort of one API call with
Hmm.
the right kind of access control. So it essentially there's a lot of data integration code that you'd probably be writing. There's a lot of authorization code that you're writing. Typically, like depending on the kind of application and the kind of organization, this whole secure access to data and this data integration could be anywhere between like 40 to like 90% of your backend code, right? So
Mhm.
that's the kind of that's basically um, how that's the portion that Hasura is automating. And to kind of come back to your question of how do people sort of um, I think how do people actually use it, or like how do people mm, in yeah, I guess use I can't think of I don't remember
Engage
the
with
exact
you, use
engine.
it, and
Yes.
sort of in some form of sustainable form, right? It's not just a download. I tried it.
Right.
My IT guy didn't allow me to do this, and then
Yeah.
like, yeah, whatever, it didn't work out, right?
Yeah.
So what would make that path easy for them so that they take advantage of your technology?
Absolutely. So Hasura is open source. It's the so it's licensed as Apache too. So it's very easy to sort of download it as a Docker container. Point it to your database and get started within whatever your environment is. And because of the open source nature, usually we've not seen any kind of hurdles in like any enterprise developer trying it out, right? And that's kind of one of the big motions of how we've gotten into enterprise development as such a young company in a data infrastructure path, which is typically like a very critical portion of your application. So that's one way of getting started with Hasura. The other, like I mentioned previously, we also have a cloud offering. So that's like 30 seconds. I mean, even with the open source, it's like 30 seconds to GraphQL. But the cloud offering essentially, your data is still where it is. So again, like we don't host the databases. Like the whole value proposition of Hasura is your data is where it is. We will create your APIs instantly for you. So you have Hasura, we host it, we scale it out, the whole no-ops, scalable, it's almost like a serverless layer. That's kind of Hasura Cloud, and you point it to your data sources, and you kind of get your APIs. So you can either have Hasura Cloud.
Are you reading the data in motion, or you're completely, you're not messing with the data? It's in motion between two people. You're just facilitating the pipes.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. And are you getting into, sorry, I'm going to dig a little deeper.
Sure.
Are you getting into all these residency stuff, or is that something which organizations should worry about?
What do you mean by residency
I mean,
stuff?
data moving borders, data moving. I mean, if it's healthcare information within the US, does it cross the borders? Is the cloud server sitting in Ireland versus Kazakhstan versus Mumbai versus, Seattle?
So I think that at this stage, the customer, so we have our, like from a healthcare and, security perspective, we have our, HIPAA and SOC 2 kind of, we have those certifications. But in terms of where your data is hosted, that's something that you're looking at. And typically, because we also have a self-hosted, like either open source and even our enterprise version, there's a self-hosted enterprise version. So you can kind of co-locate it to where your data is, right? And so that's kind of the advantage that we have of it being also available as open source, software. And even with the cloud today, we have multiple regions. So today we run on AWS, but we will be also available on other clouds going forward. So you can sort of that co-location and being close to where your data is part of what we will be enabling.
So what's growth for you from here? And coming back to the theme of our session also, you heard Sandeep and Rishabh talk a little bit about AI and ML, and they showed a bunch of things which they could go off and build models. Clearly, everything they showed has a data connection somewhere behind, right? And it's probably using some data source. And if they had to get the information about the car, that data has to be brought in. And I think you would solve the problem if that data was coming from very disparate sources, right? Maybe 100 machine shops or repair shops across the country, bringing in that data and giving you a used car information. What's the growth path for you from here? I mean, what top 2 or 3 use cases or customer segments are going to take you to that sort of billion download threshold or significantly higher usage level of your capabilities?
Absolutely. So just a quick point on the AI ML, since we were talking about it and listening to the speaker. So one of the interesting use cases that we've been observing is that, people kind of materialize this data into, say, a Postgres database. So eventually, when you're building an AI or an ML application, finally, when you want to show that data on an application, however people are consuming it, right? Like maybe it's a dashboard. So when you kind of do that, so what people do is, maybe it's a time series database, an ML sort of thing, and then you kind of materialize that data in, say, a Postgres database, and then you instantly get APIs. So then again, your core competency could be in that AI and ML and space, or whatever else that you're doing, and then the application is just something you have to kind of showcase. So that's another interesting pattern that we've been seeing. But to go back to your question of what's growth for us, it's basically like all your data, right? Like you were saying, like wherever your data is, we want to be able to enable you to access that data and like really make that data infrastructure, that layer, that middle tier kind of part of your infrastructure, make that a commodity. So that for the next few years, what that looks like for us is to continuously add support for more databases, and also open it up in a way that the community can start adding support, right? We add support. Again, that's the beauty of it being an open source product as well. But there are fringe databases. The database market is also evolving. There are new data, like for instance, Yugabyte distributed SQL database. They've added support for Hasura, and there's Planet Scale that's coming up. So once we have full support for MySQL, that's kind of next. If they already speak Postgres, then anything that already speaks Postgres already has Hasura, already gets to work with Hasura. But if you've got a different flavor of Postgres, you can kind of adapt Hasura. So the next sort of thing is just this, really that coverage of all other data sources, which will be all kinds of databases, document stores, structured, unstructured, and then kind of really that integration play between data sources, which we're doing, but making that more seamless, working more towards it. And the thing is that today organizations are already using multiple databases. Postgres is used by a small number of, probably more in, at least in enterprise, it's probably in the newer teams, right, that are using, teams that have come up in the last 4 or 5 years are probably the ones using Postgres, but others are using SQL Server or Oracle. So there's also that natural motion within, right? Because what people are seeing and what we're hearing from our customers, the teams that are starting to use Hasura are kind of moving at a pace that's much faster than what the enterprise is seeing. And so then there's a natural sort of expansion that is product-led as we kind of add these data sources. So that helps us kind of really move within. And once we move within teams in organizations with different databases that they have, then a lot more like an organization-wide opportunity starts opening up, right? Like once we're able to connect to all of that data. So that's kind of the way that we move from a single team to multiple teams to kind of like being sort of like that, like your data, like, like the core, the central part of, your data infrastructure for online apps.
Awesome. So I'm going to try and close with a couple of things, right? Let's take different personas. I'm a startup doing some data analytics work, maybe in retail, maybe in hospitality, etc. I'm assuming it's an opportunity for me to be able to, look at the capabilities you offer and the data sources you have connections with, and then start doing sort of almost virtual joins or kind of, validations of my analysis or the recommendations I'm making. That's an opportunity to come to look at what Hasura offers as a potential data startup or analytics startup.
So the analytics, like the sort of the analytics space is not something we are immediately focused on. So we're like, we're still looking at kind of online applications. So, if you're making like, if you want that analytics data, there are products that are suited for like analytics, kind of data and like the things that you want, the sort of workflows that you want to build. But at the end of the day, if that is the data that needs to become a part of the core application that you have, the sort of the online applications that you have, then you can bring that in. But today, what we're looking at is sort of like the Swiggy, like like Swiggy is one of the products that they're building is based on Hasura. Basically, like the online kind of applications that is in the hands of people that people are using. If it's analytics data, like I said, even with the ML and AI kind of thing, you're probably like materializing that data somewhere into a database to be read by like an app that needs to showcase that, right? Like what is the app that's showcasing that data? So that's the kind of analytics angle today. But that, that's something that we might expand into later. It's not a core focus today.
Fair. Switching gears in terms of personas, lots of students come and listen to these conferences. Lots of colleges and professors also look at any advice or guidance you would have in terms of how they could potentially use some of the capabilities, maybe to do some of their projects or hone their skills in data. Anything you would have for them?
I think as students specifically, as they're going to go out into the job market, like GraphQL is a really up and coming space. from my perspective, a lot of students that I've been speaking to, I mean, I don't speak to them that often, but whenever I hear from students or like look at cover letters from, fresh grads applying, everybody wants to get into ML and AI. Like that's like the buzzword,
Yeah,
right? So
$400 billion opportunity or something like that.
right? But, yeah, but there's also like the whole web development space. There's a lot going on there, and that's not going away anytime for so people looking at sort of systems kind of development and just sort of like web in the web and mobile space. Like GraphQL is a huge up and coming sort of focus area. So that's something that is worth looking at, worth learning, worth getting ahead of the curve, because it's a new thing. Again, anytime you can get ahead of the curve, you sort of give yourself that little bit of like that advantage.
Sorry. Pay attention, guys, students, folks in the audience, developers, young developers. Go check out GraphQL.
Yeah, so that's I think the thing, and we have like a bunch of tutorials available on I think hasura.io/learn. So that's a resource, but there's just a lot of GraphQL as a space I think is interesting for those in looking at like web development. That's something that I would recommend to students as well as professors tuning in. And otherwise I think I think the only thing for students is just don't worry about what's the next, what's on the hype train. Just keep building things, right? I mean, sure, you could use lots of different things to build, but just keep building and just keep like there's a plethora of tools and like things happening, and just no amount of online courses and watching talks is sort of going to get you in the weeds. You have to go out there, use the low code tools, but make sure you're also learning like low code and no code tools as a learning platform is great, because you get to focus on certain parts, not worry about the others, and then you can kind of do that and like really look at different portions of the stack that you're interested in, but just keep building. And
it's been phenomenal. I want to close with one thing. You published in Nature. Not many people get to do that. Give us a minute on that. What was that about, and how did you get about to do that?
That is a past life. That is also
the reason I bring it up is also it's also to give a perspective to audience and students that you can be a hardcore data dudette, like Rajoshi, but also have pretty wide set of interests. That's the reason I sort of bring out that point. But please go ahead.
No, absolutely. I actually like my background is in bioinformatics and genomics, and that's kind of that was what I studied in university, and that was my first job in biodiesel and genomics. And so that was the work that I did with genomics and biodiesel and green algae, and sort of basically 2 years of my post-college work that got published I think 10 years later. Wow. So it was, so that was work that I had done really long back, but that's also kind of the reason I moved away from research. So it's nice that I got published, but it's also like 10 years later wasn't sort of the pace at which I wanted to move at my life. And so that's kind of why I moved into like startups.
It's still pretty cool. I every now and then boast with my daughters, 27 years later after I published a paper, people still do citations of that paper. I'm like, guys, go find something newer. So anyway, so 10 years is pretty quick. But Rajesh, I'm sorry, I have to cut this off. I also have to run to another session. But this has been awesome, right? It's definitely been a learning for me. I will make sure that some of our Deep Tech Club and other startup networks which we have at least a link of what you are, and maybe we'll invite you back into a different forum to go into more specific nuances. But students take note, startups take note, consumer companies who've been working off of customer data and all kinds of other data. Please make sure of the capabilities. Clearly, 100 million downloads should wake you up if you haven't paid attention already. Rajeshi, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I know there was a bit of a last minute discussion with you over the weekend. Guys, she actually, took weekend calls with me to make sure that we could actually make it to the session. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Really enjoyed this as well. Thank you.